Hi everybody, I'm Mark Feit from Internet 2. I'm going to talk to you today about what we're doing with support for operating systems. Antoine Delvaux could not be here today, so I am going to be presenting his content as well. Let's go have a look at it. As Andy mentioned earlier, sort of the big news I think over the last year has been related to what Red Hat has been doing with CentOS. And last December, of course, Red Hat made the announcement that they were going to drop all support for CentOS 8 at the end of 2021, which is coming up in a month or so. The original date for that, of course, was 2029, and we figured we had a fairly long ramp on that, and we had done a whole bunch of work toward a much overdue port of perfSONAR to that platform. What it announced as a replacement is called CentOS Stream. And CentOS Stream is a series of, they call them semi-rolling releases. But the interesting part about it is that it sits downstream of Fedora and upstream of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And a lot of people have criticized that move as putting it into the, kind of making it, beta for Enterprise Linux, which was, I don't know if that's if it's an accurate criticism or not. Red Hat has said that it's actually going to be fairly close to the, to what's going to be released. But I guess we'll see what happens with it. So we after this announcement, we of course had to start thinking about what we were going to do about it because CentOS has been sort of our primary development platform for a while. So we started looking at the landscape of what was available as far as distributions derived from Red Hat. So currently, or prior to this, I guess there were four existing distributions. There was Fedora, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, of course, CentOS, and Oracle Linux. Three of those were all built on the Red Hat Enterprise Linux stable base, which has been great. All four of them have been generally available for a very long time. Fedora not being, Fedora is always sort of the bleeding edge distribution, so we never really supported that. But the important thing to note about all these is that all four of them are under corporate control. So Fedora and Red Hat, or Red Hat Enterprise, and CentOS obviously were run by Red Hat, and then Oracle is kind of owned by Oracle, obviously. In that time, since the announcement happened, there's been a few new distributions that have showed up. CentOS Stream, obviously, which I guess technically it's not really stable base because it sits between Fedora and Enterprise. That went to general availability in January of this year, and again is also, it's Red Hat's baby. But also two additional distributions have popped up to kind of fill the gap of where CentOS 8 lives, and those are called Alma Linux and Rocky Linux. Both of those are built from the Enterprise Linux base. They have both gone to general availability in the course of this year. So Alma reached that back in March, and Rocky reached it a few months later in June. And both of them are maintained by sponsored foundations. So that actually makes them kind of interesting from our standpoint. So as far as the sponsored foundations go, both Alma and Rocky have their own sponsored foundations, and this is just kind of a partial list of the sponsors. What's interesting to note is that Rocky drew kind of the three big heavy hitters in the cloud space. So you have AWS and Google Cloud and Azure. So that probably bodes well for that distribution. Also interesting to note is that AWS has kind of bought into both, and presumably they're doing that because they're going to support both in their own infrastructure. So I imagine, again, there'll probably be good support for that either way. I mean, and both of these are going to end up, kind of bug for bug compatible with Red Hat Enterprise. So hopefully it won't matter which one gets used, or even if one goes away. Features wise, I showed this chart at the European perfSONAR Linux users group, the European perfSONAR users group meeting back in the spring, and this chart was actually a little different than it is now. Both are available on Intel and select ARM architectures. Both have EPEL built in, so those really haven't changed. What has changed, and really this is probably just because there was kind of a 3-month gap between getting Alma out to general availability and doing the same with Rocky. At the time, Rocky did not have official Docker images and Vagrant boxes, and that has since changed. So everything is pretty much on par. The number of mirrors has also become a lot more equal. There was Alma's, I think at the time was at 130 something, and they've kind of come up to 155. And Rocky was kind of much further behind, but even they've come up to speed on that too. So really, in the grand scheme of things, which one we go with is probably not going to matter. So what are we going to support in the future? We sent out an announcement about this in August, but I'll kind of recap it here, just so that everybody's on the same page here. We will continue to support CentOS 7 until its end of life, which happens on the 30th of June, 2024. So if you're still running that, don't worry, it's not going anyplace. Our primary support is going to be, for the moment, Alma Linux starting in the 5.0 release. That currently does everything for us that CentOS 8 did. There are some minor differences, and I think most of those kind of parallel the differences between CentOS and Red Hat Enterprise, so this will be a little more Red Hat Enterprise-y, and we will, of course, make the changes in the system to make it work in that environment. Initially, it's going to be our primary development environment. Part of the reason that it was selected was that Internet 2 has a bunch of experience with it and are having really no problems with it. It's pretty much it looks, smells, feels, and tastes like Red Hat Enterprise. So we went that way. Rocky Linux we will support either with or just after 5.0. And the way we'll support that is we'll probably still build the RPMs on Alma, but there should be no problem with compatibility whatsoever between those. We are also going to have what we call advisory support for a few distributions, namely Oracle Linux and Red Hat Enterprise. Red Hat Enterprise, obviously, because that's what the two distributions that we support are based on. And basically, the way advisory support works is that if we're advised that it works, we'll mention it. But they are not going to be officially supported by the project. We would absolutely welcome if there are people in the community who are using either distribution who either want to join us in the test bed or contribute some development resources just to kind of test it out and maybe make some changes to help compatibility. We absolutely welcome that because we want perfSONAR to run on as many different platforms as we can possibly as we can accommodate within reason. And in that vein, if there are patches that people supply that don't break the supported distributions, we will absolutely accept those and put them into the source code because again we think that's kind of important. There are two distributions that we are absolutely not going to support. I'm reasonably sure you can guess what those two are. The first is CentOS 8, obviously, because that goes away, within the next 60 days. And it's just, at this point, it's just not worth dealing with. And the other is CentOS Stream. We will probably experiment with that internally so that we can accelerate the process of getting Alma and Rocky 9 support in place earlier rather than later. We were sort of delinquent, I think, in getting the CentOS 8 support in place, and I guess maybe timing wise it sort of worked out okay just because of what happened as far as support for that goes. So that's the Red Hat half of it, and this is all based on what Antoine provided. So I will kind of run through that as well. So we've supported Debian and Ubuntu in 4.4. So this is kind of the current state of things. We support Debian 9, Debian 10 for the tools and test point only. So we don't support the full toolkit on that yet. Although I'm pretty sure that's planned for the future. And we also support Ubuntu 16 and 18, and I think there's work underway for 20. I'll talk about that in the next slide. And this is supported over a pretty wide variety of architectures. So AMD 64, i386, if you're still running that, ARM, various flavors of ARM are also available. So that's so we have reasonably robust support there. In 5.0, we're gonna trim things down just a little bit. So there will be support for Debian 10, Ubuntu 18, and Ubuntu 20. So obviously, 9 is going to go, support for Debian 9 is going to go away there, and support for some of the older Ubuntu 16 will go away as well. This will also be on um, a shorter list. So it'll be AMD 64, ARM 64, ARM HF, and PowerPC, because we actually have a couple of people who use that. So that's pretty much the summary of it. There are a couple of other little items that are kind of worth mentioning, so I thought I would. This is going to be a reasonably short talk, so you'll actually get some bonus time for lunch. But we do have a couple things going on I wanted to mention. We have some internal efforts going on to improve the way we support different operating systems. Historically, we have done all of our development on CentOS, and then we've treated Debian and Ubuntu as ports. And we're making some efforts to make those first-class development environments so that people can do development on those the same as they would on CentOS. So we've done some improvements to the build system, and actually this is actually something that was built for pscheduler, and I'll talk about that a little more in a second. But we developed this thing called Unibuild, which is an extension of what we built for pscheduler. We have a whole thing internally that builds groups of packages and gets them all packaged and turned into repositories. And Unibuild's job actually is to do the same either for enterprise Linux derived platforms or Debian derived platforms, and kind of do it in the same way so it looks kind of the same no matter which platform you're on. As I said a second ago, this is built for pscheduler. We are probably going to look at incorporating that elsewhere, and hopefully that will also ease some of our continuous integration and distribution, the friction in those systems that we have for right now. Additionally, some of you are aware that we run a testbed, and we could actually really use some additional participation in that as well. We have lots of distributions to deal with. We have CentOS is reasonably well covered. We have pretty good coverage for Debian as well, but we would certainly welcome some resources to help out on Alma 8 and Rocky 8 as well. Just if anybody wants to participate, please drop us a line, and we can get you part of that. Basically, what participation entails is anywhere from 2 to 8 VMs. And we tend to configure them 4 cores apiece with 4 gigs of RAM and 40 gigabytes of disk, and 1 public-facing IP apiece. And for the most part, they're set and forget. We do have some infrastructure available to run these under Vagrant on bare metal. What we're doing at Internet 2 is we actually have pairs of VMs. We have for each release that we have, which is, we have production and staging and a couple of other, we have the minor release, and I think we keep the last one around as well, just to make sure everything works together. We have some kind of enterprise Linux-centric things to get those built up and run, and in each pair we let one run over the long term, and we rebuild the other every night, so that we have some idea as to how upgrades and that sort of thing go as well. As I said, it is EL-centric. We will probably switch to Ansible for Debian support, because there is lots of things. We have lots of Ansible support for Debian. I think it would be good if we ate our own dog food. It is also built right now just for VirtualBox. I may switch that to LiveVirt for wider support in the future. But again, if you're interested in participating, all it takes is just some resources, and it's not a whole lot. Even if you can just support running one release on one distribution, it would be a huge help. So that's actually pretty much all I have for you today. So you're going to get some of your lunchtime back. And if you have any questions or anything else like that, I will be around. But before we depart here, I will put this slide up and put in a plug for the NGI and Advanced Networking event that Internet 2 is throwing on December 1st through 3rd. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And if anyone has questions,
I was gonna say, you're not completely off the hook. There were some questions. So so one of the first ones comes from Brian. So he was asking, will there be any testing of converting like a live toolkit box to Alma?
That's a really good question. Alma does not exist in CentOS, Alma obviously never had an EL7 based release. So that would, I'm sure I'm sure one of us will test that out eventually. I suspect that, and it's been a while since we did the 6 to 7 transition, but and Andy, you may remember this better than I do, but we may recommend a full reinstall for that, just to make sure that you get something that works.
Yeah, for 6 to 7, we required a complete full install. So Brian just shared a link about how to migrate from CentOS to Alma Linux. I haven't clicked through it, but that might be worth a read too. So,
yeah, if I'm not that far down in the chat yet, but if it's the one I think it is, then it's really for migrating CentOS 8 to either of those. So that may not apply to us. Let's see. We had some cheers for Ansible. Hooray! Yeah, the Ansible stuff has actually been really useful. We did a deployment in 2019 at Supercomputing, and it was almost one touch. And this year we're doing that remotely because I'm not physically there, but that has also been one touch. So it's actually been a big help. I guess the other question about Debian 11. That's probably a good question for Antoine, who I don't believe he said he might pop in if he could. Yeah, I don't see him in the list of participants, so he may not have been able to make it in. Let's see.
So I will just say, I'm sure we will support Debian 11. I just don't think Mark or I know the timeline as of right now. So, but yeah, we're planning to keep up to date with that in Ubuntu 20, obviously.
Yeah. And I can tell you all sorts of things about the EL world, but Debian is kind of not my.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Antoine unexpectedly had to miss today, so we can probably provide more info on that through other channels. I did want to actually make one comment when you were talking about some of the Debian 10 stuff and talked about how it didn't support the toolkit. Just to kind of tie it into the previous talk, the reason for that is actually Esmond. There's some dependencies in there that make it really challenging on some of the newer Debian systems to support that. And it basically just, with Esmond on its way out the door, it wasn't worth the time to figure those out. So once we get things migrated over to OpenSearch, we'll have parity there again. What else? It looks like there's a couple other things. Looks like some.
Marcos pointed out that a link over at Alma Linux about that covers 7 to 8. So that is something we'll test out if it turns out that there's not a lot of risk in doing it, then we'll probably, if we're comfortable with it, we'll probably recommend it, but we'd have to test it first.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, well, we are about 10 minutes probably ahead of schedule. So I think what we're going to do is we'll use the next 10 minutes as kind of a break. I think maybe some of the speakers will grab a quick lunch. We'll circle back here in 10 minutes for basically the lunch open discussion session. So again, it's essentially an open discussion, and in QA, we don't have a lot of structured content there. We kind of just wanted to give that to everybody who's attending to have a chance to chat, and we can go into breakout rooms and things like that. If you are going to skip that session for whatever reason, we will resume with the lightning talks at basically 55 minutes from now. So I think that'd be 4:45 GMT. Please join us back then, and we'll kick off the afternoon sessions. But hopefully, talk to most of you in 10 minutes or so at lunch. And it's all on this session, so we'll probably just mute video and come back. So, all right, thanks.